America's symbol of excellence in sports entertainment.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Can Chris Hero Save Wrestling? We're going to find out today. And of course, in order to do that, we've got to welcome in the host of the show, Mr. Chris Hero. Chris, how are you, man?
Better than I deserve, Conrad. How are you?
Boy, I like that. I may have to use that. I'm great, dude. I'm excited to be back here with you. We missed a week last week. You got a lot of stuff cooking in real life, and I don't know that we're ready to spill the beans on all that yet, but we are excited to do something that, well, it's sort of fitting for someone with the last name Hero. It's a bit of an origin story, if you will. How did Chris Hero get into wrestling? Let's start at the beginning, Chris. You were born a small black child. What's that movie from The Jerk, or that line from The Jerk? Either way, the idea is you grew up in Ohio and you eventually discover wrestling. How old and how do you go about discovering wrestling?
So I was born late 79, so I am an 80s baby. Growing up, I had a knowledge that pro wrestling existed. I knew of it, but I didn't know enough about it, and I didn't quite have the interest to dig any further. I remember seeing LJN figures at the store. I think I've said this before, but I just have this vague memory of Paul Orndorff doing a pile driver. So that was probably 85, 86. But it wasn't until I want to say third grade. I think I had maybe heard some people in class discussing pro wrestling, and I just had decided, like, man, I really want to check this out. And January of 1989, I saw the Royal Rumble, and that was my first full-on exposure to pro wrestling, and I just was hooked just immediately. All the different characters, the different colors, the different personalities, just the different gimmicks. It was just so fascinating and so interesting to me. So from Rumble 89, I started to watch every Saturday. We had a VCR, so I would try to tape everything. And of course, I watched all the television that would lead up to WrestleMania 5, which was the Mega Powers exploding. So all of that is just very vivid in my head. I did watch NWA as well. It would come on Saturday mornings as well. You'd get like an hour of NWA and you'd get an hour of WWF. Probably be some American Gladiators in there too, or some Gravedigger and Bigfoot or the monster trucks. But I had a mother that was very supportive, and she would take me to the bookstores to pick up magazines. I remember getting this giant red book called The Complete Book of Wrestling, which is one of those George Napolitano books that have all these stunning photos inside, and it has bios for a lot of the pro wrestlers. And that was my introduction to guys like Abdullah the Butcher, Bruiser Brody, the Missing Link, three guys that I still have a fascination with to this day. But then it's also why I have a weird knowledge of the Simpson brothers, that South African tag team that wrestled in World Class, or Coco Beware's old tag partner, Norvell Austin, like, just because these photos were so, burned into my brain, and you just flip through and read over and over and over. My mom would take me to flea markets as well. And that's where I would pick up old wrestling magazines, stuff from the late 70s and early 80s. And I remember reading an article about Bruiser Brody passing away, and this is in 1989. I'm like, he's dead. Like, what the, hard to, reading about the Von Erichs and stuff. It was just, as a 9-year-old boy, I'm reading this stuff and trying to figure out, pro wrestling history. And like I said, watching all the television up until WrestleMania 5. A little bit after WrestleMania 5, WWF did their, every other month they would stop at Hara Arena in Dayton, Ohio. My mom took me to a show, and Warrior wrestled Rick Rude. Wow. And I believe Warrior won by count out. And that was my introduction to, hey, title belts, they do not change hands on a count out, which is, as a kid, I'm like, I had no clue. I didn't understand that. And Also, I do remember the first match that I saw in person was the Blue Blazer versus Bad News Brown.
Wow.
Yeah, so I just there's something about my personality, and I guess it goes all the way back to this, that whenever I'm interested in something, I just dive headfirst into it. I want to know anything and everything about it, particularly the interesting, fascinating stuff. But I just really become enamored. And that's what happened with me in pro wrestling. And for the next couple years, I really couldn't get enough, man, whether it was the figures or the magazines or the TV episodes or the pay-per-views. We had a satellite dish. So we'd get our on-sat guide, and I would flip all the way to the back and see the weird times that Global would be on television, or ICW or IWCCW or World Class or any of this. And I didn't always get to see it, but I was fascinated to just step into this world of pro wrestling and just kind of completely immerse myself in it.
Talk to me about your familial setup. Was anyone in your family a wrestling fan? I know you mentioned that your mom was supportive, but tell me a little bit about more of, if there were fans in the family or not.
My dad, the only thing he was a fan of was NASCAR. So I have silly trivial knowledge in my head from NASCAR growing up, and I don't even like NASCAR. I never really did, but I know names like Dick Trickle and Cale Yarborough and Daryl Walter, like these names and stuff. Every Sunday my dad would have the races on, but my dad had no interest whatsoever in pro wrestling. I don't remember him ever shaming me for liking it, but it was not his thing. My mom, I would say she was a fan by proxy. She'd take me to the shows and cheer and boo just with me, but I don't think it was as entertaining for her. Like, maybe the live shows were entertaining for her, but it wasn't to the point where she was a diehard fan.
In terms of your other friends at the time, is this something you had, like friends at school and you guys were big wrestling fans, or were you sort of the odd man out there?
There were always a couple. I switched schools quite a bit growing up. The area that I was living in, or the area I lived there my whole childhood, it my parents felt that the local school district was not a wonderful school. So they'd pick different schools for me to try out and go for a couple years. I remember I went to school in my grandmother's district for a couple years, and then I spent 2 years at a at a really small Christian academy. I spent 2 years there, and I think that maybe there were like 10 kids in my class. Then I moved to a fourth grade, so fourth all the way up to eighth. I went to a school in a town called New Lebanon, Ohio, which again, 15 minutes from my house, not very far, but now the classes are a little bit bigger. There's like 70 kids in my grade. And then I go to a high school, Northmont High School, and I've got 500 kids in my grade. So looking back on this as a kid, I'm just, every couple of years, it's just this culture shock of, new people, larger amounts of people. So I would always have a couple friends that were interested in wrestling. Whether we would play the video games or the figures, the toys, or what. I remember I was in a Cub Scouts for a little while, Cub Scouts, and then later Boy Scouts. My mom took all of us to wrestling shows a couple times, so that was a nice thing. But there may have been some acquaintances of mine that were, had interest in pro wrestling and thought it was cool, but never quite had the obsession that I did. Which, as you can see to this day, here we are 30 years later and we're still talking about pro wrestling. So I would have some friends that were into it, but it was never, not until late high school did anybody speak about pro wrestling with any type of actual excitement, or it was always, it was a joke. It was, you watch that, you carry around a little bit of shame because you enjoyed it, but nobody else did. And you didn't understand why.
Is it fair to say you were more a WWF kid growing up, you know, in your initial fandom?
Yeah, absolutely. I was more WWF, but I did enjoy WCW. I liked Sting. I liked the Road Warriors. Um, little known fact here, one of my, I'll add a little trivia here for people listening. One of my absolute favorite tag teams growing up, I'm actually looking at them right now. I will pull this over. We have Dan Spivey and Sid Vicious, the Skyscrapers.
I love it.
Man, they were just so damn cool. They would power bomb the hell out of people. I will test your trivia real quick, Conrad. Do you know what hometown the Skyscrapers were announced from?
Well, I know once upon a time Sid was being introduced from anywhere he damn well pleases.
Yes. So prior to that, the Skyscrapers were announced from Metropolis.
Oh, I like that.
And if you will know, Chris Hero's hometown is Metropolis.
So, did you guys bump into each other downtown or something like that?
Yeah, they used to shove me in lockers and give me swirlies, you know. God, I thought Dan Spivey was so cool, man. You look back on him now with 2021 eyes and you're like, man. it's very funny. I saw a photo from Chris Owens, the Andre the Giant historian and aficionado, posted a photo the other day of some sort of a weigh-in between Andre the Giant and Big John Studd, and there's a photo of Dan Spivey there, and he's got that pumpkin pie haircut, and he's got no undershirt on. He's just looking like $100.
I love that. Looking like $100.
So I did love WCW as well, but it was grainier. It was darker. It was, WWF just had this gloss, their video packages and the bright colors of everybody from the Hart Foundation to Warrior to Hogan. I was more of a WWF fan, but I did like all pro wrestling.
Now, being in Ohio, you probably got more WWF shows than WCW as well, right?
That is true. Like I said, Hera Arena, they would come there for a while. They would come once a month, but they're doing probably half a dozen shows at that arena. WCW would come through once in a while, but it would typically be in Cincinnati at the Riverfront Coliseum. And that was just a little bit too far for me to beg my mom to go see, Flying Brian and the Z-Man against the York Foundation or whoever it was. I did not see a WCW show until I was in high school, actually. But yeah, I went to some of my memories of going to live shows. I got to see the first ever Ric Flair Hulk Hogan match. That was a dark match at a TV taping, one of those 6-hour long Wrestling Challenge or Wrestling Superstars TV tapings, again at Hera Arena. I got to go to the first pay-per-view King of the Ring.
Wow, you saw some pretty monumental stuff.
Yeah. There is a moment somewhere in King of the Ring, and I don't know if it's on the version on the network or if it would have been on the VHS, but they are panning through the crowd. I think they've got a skit where they're like, they're doing like the guys are at the hotlines. You've got like Lex Luger and on the, call in now and talk to your favorite superstars, whatever bullshit they were doing. So they do a backstage segment with that, and then they come back out and they pan through the crowd, and you can see a 13-year-old Chris Hero with an Undertaker shirt. He's got a Tatanka foam tomahawk. And I am just shaking that damn thing. And I'm pretty sure I was doing the Tatanka yee.
Oh my God. We finally found the one Tatanka fan. I just quickly looked it up. Dayton, Ohio, October 22nd, 1991, over at the historyofwwe.com. They even note, although the Oakland show is generally regarded as the first Hogan Flair bout, this is the true first meeting. And in the notes from their account that night, it says that originally it was advertised as Ric Flair versus Roddy Piper, but Hulk Hogan was substituting for Roddy. So yeah, you saw the first ever Flair Hogan match in all places, Dayton, Ohio.
Dayton, Ohio. And I have no memories of the actual match, but I got all the magazines back then. You get like this one magazine, Wrestling Superstars, and they would have a wrestling fantasy thing every, it would be like, what if Ultimate Warrior wrestled Big Van Vader, or you'd have teams of WWF and WCW. And man, that was really in my creativity. I would, write everybody's names down. I would pick my 2 or 3 guys from the smaller companies that I thought they had cool names or whatever. And, or you'd see cool pictures of them, and just, you'd book your own little cards. Or I had this coffee can game where, I'd write everybody's name down on a piece of paper, and you'd fold it up and you'd throw it in the little coffee can, and you'd shake it up, and you'd have like a little tournament. And I'm not ashamed to say, Conrad, that Paul Roma won many of my tournaments.
Well, nothing wrong with that. Paul Roma was over. I don't know. I mean, I guess we shouldn't say we don't know. We know that the turn where fans sort of regurgitated him was the whole Horseman thing. But dude, part of Power and Glory, he was badass.
I love that team. And I loved him as a Horseman. I thought that was, man, he's finally going to get the push he deserves. And oh, damn. That did not quite go as well as I had hoped, or Paul.
Let's talk about what's next for you. After you discovered the WWF and you discovered WCW, somewhere in there you're going to discover independent wrestling, but I don't know when that is. I remember going to an indie show in probably 92 and being like, what is this? Because I was only used to the glitz and glamour that we would see on WWF TV or a WCW TV taping. And then I got to see real up close and personal indie wrestling. When did you first see an indie show?
I did not see an independent show until the summer of 98. And that, that story, works its way into how I became a pro wrestler myself. But when the PWI started to put out their PWI 500, that's when I was like, oh my God, there are so many wrestlers. Who is Morgus the Maniac, right? Who is the Mongolia Mauler? Who are these guys? Why are they not in WWF or WCW? I knew a world like that existed, but I just didn't, you just don't understand. You don't think, and then I just think at that time, WWF and WCW was enough. I was getting a couple hours a week. Gosh, what would it have been? About 4, I guess, if you have prime time, you got Wrestling Challenge, you got Superstars, you got Saturday Night, you got Worldwide. Shoot, you're looking at about 6 hours of entertainment there, maybe more. So for me as a kid, that was enough. So I just, for whatever reason, I didn't look any further into that. So I didn't end up going to my first independent wrestling show until, the summer I had graduated high school.
Let's talk about backyard wrestling. Back before that was a thing, I did living room wrestling. I think a lot of people listening to this would, pretend like they were their favorite wrestlers and, throw some pillows off the couch or whatever in the living room. Did you do any of that, or get back on the trampoline, or do any old sort of fantasy wrestling, if you would?
The only real fantasy wrestling I did when I was young was on my front porch. The house we had in Dayton, Ohio, we just had this giant concrete slab on the, right directly at the front of the house. And there was kind of a rail on the side, and then, a rail that would go down the steps. So I would use the rail and the corners as like my ring. I'm just, like 10, 11 years old and climbing up to this thing and jumping off and wrestling absolutely no one, just a kid, just jumping around, doing whatever. And we had a restaurant across the street from our house. And I remember sitting over there with my mom and dad one time, and, one of the waitresses came over and was like, hey, what were you doing over there on the porch? And I was mortified that people had been observing my personal private playtime. I'm like doing Vader bombs off of this rail onto nothing. And then super self-conscious that people are across the street are watching me like, what is wrong with this kid? What is he doing? So my actual foray into backyard wrestling was a very brief and short-lived one, but it is kind of a funny story. And it's one that a certain sect of my fans will bring up every now and again. Summer of '98, like I said, I saw independent wrestling for the first time, and I can talk about this at length and a little bit later. But while I'm training to pro wrestle, I'm also dipping my toes into the internet for the first real time. I had been online, 96, 97 at friends' houses on their computers, but I got my own computer right when I graduated high school. So I'm surfing the web, looking for stuff and trying to find more about any kind of local wrestling. And I find a wrestling company in the Cincinnati area with the initials GEW, which stands for Garbage Everywhere Wrestling.
Oh my gosh.
So I did not know what backyard wrestling was. I didn't have any concept of that. Again, my brain was very new to pro wrestling. I had been a fan, but as far as diving any further than that, I didn't have the knowledge of that. I didn't know it existed. So sure enough, they've got a spot on there to email, and they have their cards, every week, and once a month they have like their super card. So I emailed these guys and I said, hey, me and my friend Adam are training at this wrestling school, and we were wondering if we could come down and have a match on your show. So they were like, yeah, of course, come on, no problem, whatever. So we're really excited about it. Okay, cool, let's get down there. We drive there. So just for context, I'm 18 years old at this time. My friend Adam, I believe he was 23 or 24. We started training together. We trained all the way through. He ended up only having one match, which was against me. And then, went on to have a normal non-wrestling life. So Adam's a little bit older than me, but we drive down to this place. I don't know if it's like Fairfield or whatever, Cincinnati area. Somebody can, clarify that for sure. And we pull into this driveway and we're like, hey, we're here to wrestle, whatever. And they're like, oh yeah, it's across the street, whatever. And I look across the street and it's just woods, right? So I'm like, yeah, cool. And I'm just trying to act like, yeah, cool, no problem, of course, So we walk across the street, we walk into the woods, we find a little path, we walk around, and there it is, a 10 by 10 wooden ring. And it's got these like wooden posts, and it's got some kind of a twine, not like super fine, but it's, a rope, binding these four posts together, and they've got some gym mats down on the middle. And again, I'm just trying to play it cool, like, yeah, no problem, whatever. And I go and I hop in the ring just like I would do at training. And I'm just like, okay, cool. I take a couple bumps in this 10 by 10 ring. And I'm just like, all right, man, cool, whatever. Let's have a match. And it was, I didn't realize what it was. I didn't know if there would be an entranceway. I didn't know if there would be a real ring, or whatever. But my friend Adam, he was Adam Cage. Adam Cage wrestled the wife beater for GEW, for Garbage Everywhere Wrestling. So they just let us go in there and have, 10, 15 minutes to do whatever we wanted. And then it was videotaped, of course. I do not know where this videotape is at the moment, but I hope I can find it and burn it.
But is the wife beater from CCW?
No. So not to get into a contest here, but I had broke into wrestling in '98 as the wife beater, and the
Whoa.
CZW, yeah, the CZW wife beater. His real name is Matt. He originally wrestled as Matt Martini, and then at some point in 1999, he started calling himself the wife beater. Um, and yeah, so it's just kind of funny that there are two wrestlers at the same time named wife beater. How peculiar, right?
How did you land on the name wife beater?
All right, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. In high school, um, when we'd go to like basketball games or whatever, there was just a group of us that we would wear our wife beater tank tops, right? Just the plain white tank tops, whatever. There'd be like 5 or 6 of us wearing these, and you're 18, you're 17, 18, whatever, and you think it's so funny, like, oh, they call these tank tops wife beaters because when you look on cops, like that's all they're ever wearing, right?
Right.
So you
Right.
just, as a 17-year-old kid, you think that's hilarious. um and not only that, my dad had these shirts. My dad was not a wife beater, not to derail you there. Yeah, he's not a great dude, but he was not a wife beater. um he had these, but they were worn, and there was just something about the fabric of them that I thought was awesome, and they had like these little holes and such. So I took all my dad's wife beaters, and I used to wear these old holy things all the time. And when I'm training to wrestle, I'm trying to come up with a name, um, and I got nothing. I have no ideas whatsoever, and I just thought, oh man, what if I call myself wife beater? 2 words. But I'm just like this 18-year-old kid who's wearing a wife beater. Like, I thought that was like a tongue-in-cheek, like you see
Ironic.
one thing
Yeah.
on a piece of paper and then they walks out of the curtain and you're like, oh, that's a little peculiar. So that was just a funny, I thought it was funny at the time. um I had a shirt that said "Just Beat It." Terrible, just terrible stuff. This is, I look back almost 25 years later and just I cringe at a lot of this. But so wife beater versus Adam Cage. We had such an entertaining match that GEW invited us back at their backyard fest, right? So we came back, like a month later, again, still in training, but still haven't had my first pro match. So this is all in this limbo period from when I first start taking bumps to when I actually have my first match. So this is like, now that we know what it is, we're still gung ho, we're on board, but there's just a little bit of like, I don't want to say shame, but we're a little apprehensive. We're a little hesitant. Like, oh my God, we're not telling everybody like, yo, we're about to go down. We're about to drive an hour to Cincinnati so we can wrestle in the woods. Right.
Right.
um, so we go down to this thing and we're like, okay, only this backyard fest is like legit. There are people from like 4 or 5 different states. I remember one dude drove in from St. Louis. We've got all, and there's just so many people now. I'm like, oh my gosh. I look over and I shit you not, Conrad, Shark Boy is selling 8x10s.
Oh, wow.
So, they must have invited him like, hey, because, Shark Boy is a Cincinnati area wrestler. They must have, hey man, you want to come check out our backyard show? And he thought like, hell yeah, I'm going to go down there and fucking make some merch money. Right. And then of course I'm a pro wrestler in training. So I'm like, very like, oh my God, this guy's a pro and he's going to see me doing backyard, this weird little thing. So we have our match. At some point we have like a shoot battle royal. It's just the dumbest thing you can ever think of. I'm in there with 10 strangers and we're fighting to throw each other out of this 10x10 ring.
Help me understand. Those words I don't think I've ever touched before in the English language. A shoot battle royal?
Yeah, shoot battle royal. We all went in with like, there was, they're not like, okay, dude's going to win the battle royal. It's like, oh, let's have a battle royal. I mean, we're all kids, right? So we go in, and again, like I said, there's people from all over. So you have like the Cincinnati guys, you have me and my friend Adam, you got these guys from St. Louis, you got a couple other people. And it's just a free for all, man. And, it's not like we're not all actively trying to win the battle royal. You know, if somebody grabs you and tosses you, you're like, oh, fuck it, let's go, whatever. But there's this one dude that was some kind of a bully, and he was just kind of smashing some of the smaller dudes. And I hit him with some kind of a weapon. I don't know what the weapon was. I don't know if it was a keyboard. I don't know if it was a trash can or something. But I just remember being like that, you know, like the drive back from that, or like, what is this weird thing that just happened, and let us never speak of it again?
Man, what a strange trip. I mean,
Yeah.
talk to me about, when you start actually training. What's the toughest part? I mean, how does that get started? What do you enjoy about it? What do you hate about it? Just chat me up about the process.
So let me back it up a bit. I'll tell you that my senior year of high school, we're getting ready. This is 1998. The school year is about to wind down, and a number of my friends are on the volleyball team. So they're like, hey dude, you should, come play volleyball with us. Like, it's fun. It's just a way to kill some time, whatever. I don't know how to play volleyball, right? But I'm like, hell yeah, let's go have some fun. Let's go play some volleyball. And it was not a team, it was a club. And what I mean by that, it was not funded at all by the school. We had to buy our own uniforms. We had to, do our own travel, etc. But man, it was so much fun. They all taught me how to play volleyball. I was okay. But some of my teammates, some of my guys, my best friend Jeff at the time, there was, one of my good friends to this day, his name is Andy. He was on the team. Like, just had some really good players. And I'll be damned, Conrad, if we did not go to the state championship.
Oh.
We lost in the semifinals to the eventual winner. But what just a wild, trippy ride that was to hop on a volleyball team and then just end up in the Ohio State University playing volleyball. Very, very bizarre. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is we had our year-end party where you've got like your little awards and your speeches and whatever, just your last get together as a team. And I overhear one of my teammates, Bill Yarnell, and he's saying like, hey man, Sean Halsey's got a wrestling show coming up, we should all go. And like, I'm like, wait a second, what? Like, what do you mean he's got a wrestling match? Like, what are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, he's been training to wrestle and he's going to wrestle and da 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 da. So I'm like, I'm like, this was a guy that had gone to my same high school, but was a couple years older. I wasn't friends with him, but I knew who he was. So I reached out to him immediately. I'm like, what do you mean you're wrestling? Like, tell me how, where do you train? What do you do? Whatever. So he's kind of giving me this information, I think, over America Online. I think that was how we were discussing this. And sure enough, I'm like, okay, cool. Let's go check it out. The show is at the Nutter Center, which is the same place that King of the Ring was.
Wow.
So I'm like, hell yeah, man, let's go check this out. And it's myself, it's my good friend Andy, and it's my girlfriend at the time. The three of us go. We go to the box office. We say we want wrestling tickets. We buy them. They hand us the tickets, and I look, and it's like WWF, and I go, oh wait, no, this isn't a WWF show. Like, whatever. So just very confused. We return the tickets, they reimburse us, and she goes, oh no, you have to go outside the front doors, take a left around the building, whatever. So we go outside, we take a left around the building, and there is just a pro wrestling ring set up in the parking lot. This is not what I'm expecting at all. I'm going to the Nutter Center, King of the Ring. But they've got guardrail set up around the ring. It is baking in the sun. This is just, I want to say this is late May, early June. I don't remember specifically. But we go, and I'm standing by the guardrail watching this. And there's maybe 150 fans or so. The name of the promotion was Unified Championship Wrestling. The promoter was Big Daddy Roger Cox. Roger worked often with Atlas Security.
What a name, buddy. You just got all over me with that.
Yeah, so Big Daddy Roger Cox was the leader of a stable called the True Thugs. So, dude, I'm 18 years old. I'm in this parking lot. I'm getting sunburned. I'm wearing a wife beater, and I'm watching the Dayton Independent Wrestling All Stars. I see Buzzsaw. I see the Atomic Rhino. I see Mr. Saturday Night. I see a guy named the Suicide Machine, Logan Kane, and come to find out, Logan is Al Snow's half brother. You know, they have the same mom. You know, he grew up with Al as his big brother. And it is comical to me because looking back on this, these guys, you know, they have a long walk to the ring. It's like the building is all the way up these stairs. You know, it's this big open area. And, you know, the wrestlers would make their long ass entrance. They'd come to the ring. But after the matches, I'm kind of like following them back up the stairs, like trying to like, hey, I was wondering, you know, how do you train? Where do you go? Like, you know, just pestering these poor guys, you know. And it comes time for my friend Sean Halsey to have his first pro wrestling match. Heartthrob Halsey was his name, the Universal Heartthrob, not to be confused with Austin Idol. Sean goes in there and his opponent is Tommy Knockout, TKO, and they lock up. He goes behind Tommy Knockout. Tommy gives him a mule kick right to the balls, turns around, punches him in the face, and pins him 1, 2, 3. So my guy, the guy that I came to see, and the guy that I'm trying to figure out how to get into pro wrestling has just lost his first pro match in 5 seconds. So it's just a lot to take in. It's a lot to register. I just am so, you know, I'm like, I want to wrestle now. I see these guys, and I had always equated pro wrestling with like the power plant style of training. It's like, oh, you know, you gotta look like the Ultimate Warrior, or you gotta, you know, be able to do 1,000 squats and 1,000 push-ups and not puke and whatever. I think I'd seen a WCW special on the power plant, and it reminded me of Full Metal Jacket. So I decided to not ever seriously consider becoming a pro wrestler. I just thought it was too far-fetched. But seeing this show and seeing these guys, and it's no knock on the guys, but they just seemed like normal guys, and I thought I was a normal guy, and I decided to do everything in my power to be one of those guys. So you know, Sean put me in touch with some people. I talked with Logan Kane, like I said, Al's half brother, and they set me up with a place in Middletown, Ohio. There was a gentleman by the name of Gary Goffinet, and I believe the story is that he was into martial arts, and he purchased a ring to do these martial arts shows or whatever it was, but he ended up buying a pro wrestling ring, a pretty good bumping pro wrestling ring. And because of that, he, you know, was getting all these requests to rent out his ring. They actually used this ring at the first Pillman Memorial Show in 1998. And so Gary was now connected into the world of pro wrestling. And he decided, well, hell, I might as well open up a wrestling school. So I go down to Middletown, Ohio. It's about 45 minutes of a drive for me. And I look at the place. You know, it's just a garage. It's a garage with a ring. There's a front room with some dirty couches. And I'm just like, all right, man, what do I have to do? How do I do this? You know, I put down a down payment, and I come back, and for the next couple months, every Tuesday and Thursday, I would train. And I thought it was training, but it was not any type of regimented training. It was like, hey, let me show you how to bump. All right, let me show you how to lock up, whatever. And then it's like, okay, now I have some practice matches. If you think about it now, that's just insane.
Right.
But at the time, I didn't know any different. And I had, there was a gentleman by the name of Bill. He had worked under the name Bodacious. Bo, first name Bo, last name Dacious.
I love it.
He came from the Charlie Fulton wrestling school. You know, Charlie and Larry Sharp originally had the Monster Factory together. So he was a Charlie Fulton guy. Bo had his career put on hold thanks to the goddamn Shaker Heights Spike from the Beverly Brothers.
Shaker Heights Spike.
Yeah, have you seen them murder people with that move before?
That should have been banned forever.
Yes. So he took one of those bad on his shoulder and was out of wrestling for a while and decided like, hey, I'm gonna dip my toes back into pro wrestling and get in wrestling shape. And man, he could not have been nicer. He pulls me aside and he says, hey, listen, you know, anything you want to know, I'll help you out. Just, he's like, be careful. Not everybody here knows exactly what they're doing. You don't want to get hurt, whatever. So he pulled me aside, taught me some holds, taught me some moves. And then to wrap this up, I will tell you how I received my first ever booking in professional wrestling.
Okay.
So I'm training at Gary's. He also ran wrestling shows under the banner OCWA. And he had booked me on a show for September. You know, I'm getting ready to have my first match. Like, hell yeah. And for whatever reason, I decided to head over to the Salem Mall, which no longer exists. Salem Mall, Dayton, Ohio. The first 2 jobs I ever had in my life were at this mall. I worked at a record store. I worked at a shoe store. So I am checking out. I think this coincided with autograph signing they had in coordinates with ECW's Heatwave 98, which would come to Hara Arena. I think that's maybe why I was at the mall. But I'm walking and I see this large group of gentlemen, and I'll be damned if it isn't Big Daddy Roger Cox. He's got his whole crew with him, and I'm like, oh man, he's the promoter for UCW. I got to introduce myself. I'm a young wrestler in training. Like I got a network. So I go up to Roger and introduce myself and talk to him and whatever. And he's just like, hey man, we got a show coming up in Xenia, you know, September 12th, you know, you free? And I go, yeah, I'm free. And he goes, all right, you're booked. Roger had never seen me do anything. He knew that, you know, I was booked to wrestle Sean, the guy that I went to watch. You know, he just had some good faith there and booked me on this show. And it was 1 week prior to my OCWA debut. So I ended up getting Gary Goffinet ended up getting scooped by Big Daddy Roger Cox on Chris Hero / the Wife Beaters pro wrestling debut.
Man, what a story. If you could think back to when you were a kid, you know, growing up, you mentioned some of your favorite wrestlers. Did you have a favorite move? Like, man, if I get into wrestling one day, I want to do this. I'm sure that evolved as time.
I mean, it's got to be the moonsault.
Sure.
Great Muda's moonsault or the power bomb. I just thought the power bomb was so damn cool. I don't know if I've mentioned that on this podcast, but it was, you know, part of the reason why I really liked the Orient Express was Akio Sato did a damn power bomb on WWF TV. And I think maybe the Skyscrapers were the first ones I had seen do it. So definitely the moonsault and the power bomb. I've got a funny moonsault story for you actually.
Please do.
Once I had, you know, had a couple training sessions, I remember thinking like, I should try a moonsault. Right? Why not? Right? I didn't know. And I thought, okay, let me see. How should I do this? I did not have the balls at the moment to climb to the top rope and just straight up do a moonsault. But what we had was, we had like some sort of a tumbling pad. I mean, it was like rainbow colored. It was pretty round. But you could kind of land on it and squish it, right? You could aim it for an elbow drop, a leg drop, a splash, whatever. So what I used to do is I would set this up in the corner, kind of like where you would be for a Vader bomb. And after realizing if I just try to do a standing moonsault, it does not go well. It's tough, it's crooked, it's whatever. So I take off running, you know, I jump over top of this dummy. I, use a little bounce and push off with the top rope, kind of like a Vader bomb. And I just hop up, I land, and then I just do a moonsault straight from the mat. And using that spring, it's kind of like you would do an up and over in the corner. I would moonsault onto this pad. And it's just, when you've never done anything like that, and you're finally getting the opportunity to just, it's like the first time you go on a trampoline, you're like, oh my God, what can I do? Let me try this. It's just an adrenaline rush. So I would make sure that every time I would have practice, I would try this moonsault and make sure that I could nail it. So I got to practice early one day, and I got in the ring. I took a couple bumps to loosen up. I ran the ropes a little bit, and still nobody's showing up. So I go, I'm going to try my sick moonsaults, right? So I set up the pad, I hop in the ring, still nobody's there. I'm like, okay. So I do my little deal. I run over it. I hop over it. I plant, I flip back for the moonsault, and I land, and I'll be damned if I forgot to put on my knee pads.
Oh,
it hurt.
Yeah.
So goddamn bad. And I remember, somebody like ducking their head in, like, they heard a big bump and they look over, and I just have to play it off like, yeah, I'm good. No problem. Right. All night, my knees were just, because I'm using so much momentum to flip myself back, and I just crushed both of my knees, and I never forgot to put my knee pads on again if I was going to do something like that. But, oh, what a dummy.
Something I wanted to mention. I think a lot of people listening to this, certainly I felt like once upon a time I grew out of wrestling. I was all into wrestling in '88. And then sometime in '92, I don't know. I felt like I grew out of it and I didn't care as much. Slowly but surely, my interest in wrestling waned. I don't think I saw anything in '93, '94, or '95. And it wasn't until late '96 when I'm flipping through the channels and I see Hulk Hogan in all black. And I think, wait a minute, what is this? I thought he was with the WWF and he was a good guy in yellow and red. What's happening? And then I was too deep. I was all in. Did you have sort of a on again, off again relationship with wrestling ever?
I did. I lasted a little bit longer than you, and I came back in a little bit later. I think it was at some point in '94, maybe late '93, early '94. I just kind of tuned out. I had, like I said earlier, I went from a smaller middle school to what to me was a giant high school. And, I'm playing football, I'm doing whatever. It just kind of consumes your life. I just did not have any interest in following wrestling anymore or watching it. I didn't dislike it or have any bad feelings toward it. I just was not as interested.
Yeah.
And that would carry on 94, 95, 96. I remember certain things. Like I remember the weekend of the Holyfield Tyson fight, right, where he bit his ear. I remember, it's just funny that I grouped these together in my brain, but I remember seeing Nitro that following Monday, and I saw Psychosis against Super Calo. And I just remember thinking, that can't be his real hair. That just cannot be Psychosis' real hair. And I mean, this is, the guy that was, I think I had tuned out, shortly after like the Giant Gonzalez era, who also, that was not real hair. But seeing Lucha Libre just, kind of blew my mind a little bit. And I was just like, oh, okay. I took note of it. I didn't start following it again. I remember when Brian Pillman passed away, I remember thinking like, oh man, I was not following wrestling at that time, but I remember being very shocked by that. And I think another thing that piqued my curiosity, somebody in school one day mentioned that, Scott Hall was turning up, or Razor Ramon rather, was on Nitro. Oh, that's kind of weird. I didn't expect that. So just these little puzzle pieces just kind of stuck in my brain. And it was not until late '97 that I started to watch Nitro.
Wow.
And I told this story, a couple days ago, and Rachel got a kick out of it, so I'll tell you. I remember coming into football practice one day, and this is my senior year, so this is late 97. And I was like, hey, did you guys see that Bob Goldberg last night, man? He was
Oh,
awesome.
Bob Goldberg.
So it took me a week to figure out that it was not Bob Goldberg, but he was indeed awesome at that time. So it took me a little while to start watching WWF again, but then I was just all in. Like I said, this all happened in such a short amount of time. I start watching wrestling again, and a year later, I'm having matches of my own. And again, this is an era that the internet is this new thing that not everybody has or not everybody is well versed in. So I remember going to prowrestling.com. That was the actual site, and finding out people's real names or finding out people's different gimmicks or whatever. I remember I saw a thing on Indies and I was like, what the hell are the Indies? Is that Indiana? Like, what are they talking about? And then, I remember seeing people talk about the Shooters with like Ken Shamrock and Dan Severn. And I'm like, what does that mean? I don't, what the hell are they? Do they bring guns to the ring? Like, what is this? Right. So it just was just a real shock to my system of the wrestling that I knew growing up. And then this new wrestling that people were actually talking about in a complimentary way. People were talking about DX and Austin and The Rock and whatever. And it just all happened so quickly. Next thing you know, I'm having my own matches.
What was the name of that website?
Prowrestling.com.
See if that's still a thing. It is still a thing all these years later.
Hell yeah.
Hey, so it's funny that you mentioned the Holyfield Tyson thing, because as luck would have it, I randomly remember that WCW ran a big show in LA that weekend, and they tried like an internet broadcast. I think they called it like Saturday Nitro or something. And it's when the NWO was super hot. So they were in the main event, but that's just, I don't know. It sticks out like a sore thumb to me that happened the exact same day as Tyson Holyfield. I'm sure some of our younger listeners are like, what are you talking about boxing for? But Tyson fighting back then was a happening. I mean, it was a part of pop culture. Everyone knew about it and was talking about it. It was a really, really big damn deal. And I just found it so interesting that WCW was running a show at the exact same time. And of course, I realize now, well, one's in Nevada and one's in California, or whatever. But as a kid, it's like, how could this happen on the same day? But it did.
Yeah. Yeah, man, Tyson was massive for me. Obviously you had Mike Tyson's Punch Out. I mean, he was on TV all the time, all the interviews. I mean, there'd be an In Living Color sketch about him every week on TV. And then the whole Buster Douglas thing happened. And as a kid, oh my God, that was crushing to see him get his ass kicked by Buster Douglas. You're like, damn. Little did I know that Vader and Larry Zbyszko were in the crowd watching that night. How funny.
Hey, tell me a little bit about tape trading. Did you ever get into that? When did that become a thing? If your fandom really doesn't get started until late 97, did you miss out on tape trading, or were you doing a bunch of that? When did that start?
I didn't do a lot right away. Like I said, my friend Adam that I had been training with, he was a bit older and he had quite a extensive tape collection. He would get all the catalogs and get all the ECW shows. So I didn't really see much ECW until, I started going through his tapes and borrowing his stuff. I would say it was at some point in 1999 that I got a hold of a guy's tape list and was like, oh my God, there are just an extensive amount of tapes. Like what, the best of this person, the best of that, whatever. So I got tapes of the guys that I was interested in that that weren't heavily featured. Like for instance, like Hayabusa, right? I'd seen Hayabusa at Heatwave 98 and just was blown away. so of course I need to get the best of Hayabusa, right? I remember enjoying all the Kaientai matches on WWF TV, whether it was Taka Michinoku, Dick Togo, Men's Teo, Sho Funaki, or Yamaguchi-san, any of them. I just remember thinking, like, every time they were on TV, I liked it and thought it was awesome. So of course I have to get the best of Taka Michinoku, the best of Kaientai DX. I liked Ultimo Dragon. I thought he had fun matches, so I had to see what kind of stuff he was up to. And then through these tapes, you're like, oh my gosh, I remember Liger. Like, Liger was so cool, Liger and Muda. And then you start to get introduced to this. But I think if, the theme I've got here is these guys are these colorful outfits, their masks, their face paint, their whatever, they're easy to recognize.
Right.
It took me a while to get into traditional Japanese wrestling, be it New Japan or All Japan, just because if you don't have a guide, if you don't have a mentor that's like telling you like, oh, hey, you should check this guy out because of this, or you should watch these series of matches, or this is this guy's mentor. Like, without those bullet points, it is very intimidating to get into Japanese wrestling. So it took me a little while longer to start watching the beefier, meatier type stuff. But in like 99 and 2000, 2001, I was buying tapes. I was trading tapes. I just remember it's just so vivid, right? You're just you're scrolling through people's websites and you're like, all right, this one, I'll send you these 6 tapes for those 5 tapes, and they're like, okay, what view quality do you want? Is it SP or SLP? Like,
oh yeah.
Yeah, man, or you get a tape and you're like, man, the tracking sucks on this, man. You gave me a bad copy. Like, just funny little things from the tape trading days.
You mentioned Hera Arena, and as funny as it sounds, anytime I think of that building, I think of the ECW pay-per-view Heatwave 98. You also mentioned you probably weren't super into ECW until much later. Did you go to that show since it was so close?
Hell yeah, I did. I was blown away. I went with, I think I went with Adam and Sean. I think with those 2 guys, and we were not on the floor, but we were like the first row up from the floor. And it had a little bit of everything for me. It had these guys from Japan. It had Masato Tanaka and Mike Awesome. I always loved Bam Bam Bigelow. I thought he was awesome. So to have him in that match with Taz, that was awesome. You got a little bit of plunder with the Dudleys and Dreamer and Sandman and all that. Spike Dudley. Just a very monumental show. You cannot see me in the audience. However, if you check out Guilty as Charged 99 from Kissimmee, Florida, or Heatwave 99 also from Hera Arena, if you flip through that, you will spot me a time or two. So for anybody out there that would like to do a little Where's Waldo?
Why don't we do a little bit of knowledge dropping here on the show? Do you got some words of wisdom for us this week, Chris?
My bit of wisdom for the week is something that I picked up from Chris Candido in 2005, 2004. When you wrestle and you put matches together, there are certain parts of the match that are more complicated and just, bigger sequences, right? You have duck this, flip on this, land on your feet, whatever, right? In wrestling nowadays, it's almost impossible to find a match that doesn't have a couple of these extended sequences, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But when you are doing these longer sequences in wrestling, do your best to not only work toward the end of the spot. And what I mean by that is if you have a couple ducks, you have a couple flips, you have a misdirection, whatever, put as much effort into each of those segments as you do the very end of it. Because I'll see a lot of times where it's, you know, oh, okay, this, and then the thing at the end is awesome. Make sure that all your little bits in between match that. If you are thinking about what's coming instead of what's happening, there's just a good chance that you'll have like spot face. You'll
Right.
have like, it looks like I'm thinking, or I'm trying to concentrate really hard to make sure that I get the right technique and get my feet in the right spot and get a good lift here. Um, if you cannot do that, I would suggest, cut that spot up a little bit and just, kind of start from scratch and really work your way through it. We get in the habit of making such a routine of what we do that sometimes you're just kind of going through the motions and you don't have that oomph behind it. Right. So don't work just for the end of the spot. Work for every little bit in between.
I like that. I think everybody can learn something from that, and hopefully we can learn about a new favorite hip hop song. You've been on a roll with the Chris Hero Song of the Week. What do you got in store for us today?
Well, I think it was time for us to throw in a song by the one and only Lil Wayne.
Oh wow, okay.
So the song I am picking for this week will be Best Rapper Alive from Lil Wayne's Carter 2 album. God, this is a wonderful song. There is a Iron Maiden sample that they feature throughout this, and to me, this song really encapsulates that era of Wayne, where he's calling himself the best rapper alive, and I don't know too many people that would have agreed with him at that very moment when that album was dropped.
No
But
way.
he put in so much work over the next couple years. He was really prolific, and I think everything just crystallized with the Carter 3. And man, there was not every artist had a song with Wayne for like a 3 year period. And I like the lyrics in this. He's got a interesting way of telling stories. I am not a massive fan of present day Wayne, but you can't deny how much work he's put in over the years and how many awesome songs he has. And Best Rapper Alive might be my favorite Wayne song of all time. So I hope you guys like it as much as I do.
Here we go. Best Rapper Alive from Lil Wayne. We'll be back next week on Chris Heroes. Can Chris Hero save wrestling? Right here on adfreeshows.com. See you next week.